Have you ever stopped and wondered about how the world is engineered to keep you safe?
Hi, everybody. In our organization, a common greeting is good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And during this webinar, I think you'll see why. So welcome or welcome back. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the Future of Safety Science webinar series, where we are asking the big questions about how the world is engineered to keep us safe. Each month, we have conversations with our experts in safety and sustainability, including the opportunity to drill down into specific inquiries in research and describe the process and impacts of global standards. Tonight, it's my pleasure to bring a really wonderful panel of speakers to you all to address the value of standards. The world thrives on innovation, but with every new product or service comes new dangers or risks associated with that technology. In order to help keep new products, systems, and services operating safely and effectively, Underwriters Laboratories develop standards that address these risks while guiding the safety, performance, and sustainability of new and evolving technologies. So standards matter by establishing baseline requirements for safety, helping new technologies come to market, and helping facilitate trade globally by making it clear what requirements must be met by products as they are entering the marketplace. Today, we have a panel of staff members from the International Standards team of Underwriters Laboratories. During much of this hour, we will talk more about why standards matter and further explain the value of standards internationally. Panelists, would you turn on your videos? So, as the videos are coming up, let me introduce our panelists. I'm going to introduce them based on the length of time they have been with the UL Standards Organization. And we'll start with a question for each of the panelists as they're introduced. So first up this evening is Eric Zhang, Regional Standards Manager for China. Eric was the first such international standards outreach manager. Eric, my first question for you is, what is a lesson that you have learned in your career, and how do you apply that to your current work?
Okay, so my learn, it is a trouble, a failure, it is a friend in my career. The people not always a success in the life, so you should be afraid the failure, but you need a brace failure. The failure tells you how you grow yourself. That is what I learned in my career. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Yes, I love that. That failure is something that we could all learn from. Great, excellent. So next up is Monju Menon V, Regional Standards Manager for India and Southeast Asia. In addition to Southeast Asia, Monju is currently covering our standards outreach in sub-Saharan Africa. Monju, the same question to you. What is the lesson you have learned in your career, and how do you apply that to your current work?
Thank you, Kelly, and it's a great pleasure to be with you all on this webinar and the interaction. What I really understood and learned is being patient and persistent. What really needs, because any standard or any quality ecosystem will have hurdles for us to see how the implementation goes on, how people embrace it, and how we can make the world a safer world, a safer place with these standards. So while we work with all the stakeholders, it becomes important for us to see that we are patient and persistent in our approach, and see to it that we don't fail in our effort, and don't be disheartened by failures, as Eric said. Thank you.
Excellent. Good life lessons all around. Our third regional standards manager joining us today is Colin Low, responsible for the ASEAN region, as well as Japan, Korea, and Australia. Colin was formerly with ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, and he brings much knowledge about international trade and relations with him. Colin, same question to you. What is a lesson that you've learned in your career and how does it apply to your current work?
Thanks, Kelly. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Colin Low, dialing in from Singapore. So to the question from Kelly, so one very important lesson that I learned throughout my career is prioritization, because we all have a lot of tasks. So we're busy creating a safer world in UL, which is our mission. But we have to understand that there's a lot of country that we're working on, so we have to do it one at a time. So everyone only have the same 24 hours per day, and then some tasks are more important than the other, and some are more time sensitive. So that's why what I learned is that we need to understand, we need to sort all different tasks based on the importance and time sensitivity, so that we can know which one to do first, and then adjust our to-do list accordingly. Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Back to you.
Great, thank you, Colin. I see how all of these are starting to reflect one another in your responses. Excellent. Okay, next up is Zahid Ahmed, Regional Standards Manager for the Middle East and North Africa. Zahid joined us about a year ago and has been a great addition to the team. Zahid, same question for you. What's a lesson that you have learned and how do you apply it to your current work? Oh, Zahid, we can't hear you. Might have you. There you are. Great. Yes, now we can hear you.
Thank you, Kelly. So hello, everyone. This is Zahid Ahmed from the Middle East. So I would like to share two very important lessons which will help advance your career. So the first one is to strive to learn, and the second is to accept new challenges. So you will always encounter people who have more experience than you throughout your career, and learning from these people will definitely help you first to grow personally, and second to grow professionally. So it's very important to seize every single opportunity and accept new responsibilities. So my advice: do not be afraid of the unknown or trying something new. It's always good to keep learning and growing. Thank you, and back to you, Kelly.
Great, thank you, Zahid. And I see in all the answers, everybody nodding. I think these resonate with all of us very much. Excellent. So our final panelist to introduce this evening is Lakshmi Nair, and she joined the team as the International Standards Engagement Manager. She formerly was with the education team of Underwriters Laboratories, so she has experience which is helpful to the international outreach and relationship building, and I think we're going to hear more about that in just a little while. But first, Lakshmi, what's a lesson about yourself or anything that you've learned in your career, and how do you apply that to your work today?
Thank you, Kelly. Namaste, everyone. The most important lesson what I have learned in life, it's all importance of patience. Life is all about waiting for a lot of things without feeling negative.
Excellent. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lakshmi. Excellent. So the acceptance of where failure fits in our lives, the persistence and patience, the prioritization, and the strive to learn and accept new challenges. Excellent advice for all of us to listen to, and I'm excited to hear your responses, to hear how this comes through in the work that you do. So let me start with Monju. Let me ask you, who develops standards? Oh, you're muted, Monju.
Yeah. Let me say, I mean, basically the standards are developed by a recognized body. There are set principles which has been defined, which are essentially like transparency, openness, consensus, coherence, market relevance, and development dimension. While we might have come across various types of standards, which could be a consortia standard, a private standard, or an industry standard, what I am really referring here is about a global standard or a national standard, which we would be using across. So as standards are basic minimum requirements, any product or process or system to be safer, secure, and sustainable to the user. it will have various actors, and that's where a recognized body which brings various stakeholders together to develop this standard.
Great. And Colin, would you talk about, who those stakeholders could be and why there are always so many stakeholders that standards intentionally involves in this process?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And I just want to add on to what Manju has mentioned. So about the stakeholders. So Kelly, you mentioned I used to work for ISO. So back then, when we talk about the history of standards, so people always like to use the old photo in black and white, and then with a group of white old wise men, and then standing in front of some classic Western buildings. So these are the people that develop standards. If that's the case, then we will suffer because the standards are supposed to be used by everyone around the world. That's why the stakeholders involved in standards, it is supposed to be anyone or the interested party who might be affected by the standards. That's why it should be diverse, it should be inclusive, it should cover as widely as possible to make sure that all the different stakeholder groups, be it consumers or be it developing countries, and everyone should be represented. Thank you, back to you.
Awesome. Okay, that's a great explanation. And Monju, can you talk about how are standards developed for different regions? So both you and Colin talked about the global or international need for standards. Are they developed for different regions with the region in mind?
Thank you, Kelly. As I spoke about, and also Colin re-emphasized, which are overall the various stakeholders, and standards or the basic minimum requirements, as we spoke about. It has to really address all the requirements to make world a safer, secure, and sustainable place. Now, as I say, safety is common, or a common criteria across. However, what would happen is various regions would have various climatic conditions, various usage patterns, various culture. So different cultures would, or different climatic conditions, usage patterns would necessitate the development of standard which addresses those regional requirements. So the global standards which gets developed with the participation of various countries, representation coming in, would have all the necessary things with reference to those countries who have participated to address the safety requirements. However, regional and national standards would be required, would be developed by those regions and the national standardization bodies to address the very local needs. Hope that answers the question. If there is anything further, I would request Colin to add in.
Great. Colin, did you want to add anything?
I think Manju answered very well. And then so I'll just add a little bit, which is when Manju mentioned about international, regional, and national standards. So we have to understand that there is no one size or fit all solutions. And that's why the international standards are contrary to common belief that international standards are supposed to be the most stringent requirements. And then by right, it should be actually the bottom line where everyone can accept. Then from different regions, because of like what Manju mentioned, the climatic conditions or even the voltage rating or these things, then the different countries should actually make the necessary adjustment to make sure that the standards are actually based on international requirements, but is customized and modified for the local condition. Thank you.
Okay, so let's get into some specifics. This next question is for Zahid and Eric. And Zahid, we'll start with you. What is a cultural or geographic factor that you make sure to consider when developing standards?
Yeah, thank you again, Kelly. So as you know, several cultural and geographic factors need to be taken into consideration in our line of work. So it is very important to address the local needs and conditions. Naturally, being in the Middle East and more particularly in the Gulf region has its impact on the development of standards. So for example, climate is a major factor we consider when develop standards to be used in the region. This is due to the fact that the desert with its high temperatures that may reach around 50 degrees Celsius causes conditions that would differ in an area where there's a lot of vegetation and cool temperatures, for example. Another factor we need to consider is the language barrier. Arabic is the official language of communication in the Middle East, making it essential in our communication with stakeholders so we'd be capable of addressing all issues and concerns that may arise. Hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Yes, and so Zahid, when we talk about the stakeholders coming together, are there global stakeholders at the table as well as local and regional stakeholders?
Correct. So we have stakeholders at all levels. So we have the national and the global stakeholders. We try to take as much as viewpoints from various stakeholders and consider that in the standards development process. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Eric, same question for you. What's another example of a cultural or geographic factor that needs to be considered?
Okay, so I think I just added Zahid. It is the history, regional history. The world is diversity. You should consider the history of the region, the culture, the background. So that is very important. I just want to add a new point. When we are writing development international standard, our effort it is to collect all the common issue from the region, and that we collect both around the world. So it is a very challenge. Different people have different position, man, history. They are in our DNA, right? Our DNA is not different. So that is why we call it a consensus. Consensus means not everyone agree one point, but most people have reached a level they can accept globally or in their organization. Thank you.
Yeah, so the history of the region and culture of the region, I imagine, has a lot of impact on how readily a group can achieve consensus or reach consensus. And yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you, Eric. So the next question that I have for our panelists is about working with standards bodies. And so this question, Eric, let's start with you. What are the differences and similarities that you notice when working with standards bodies? For example, with developed countries versus developing countries, what are some of the contrasts that you see?
Yeah, I think it is very interesting. This topic it is very interesting. The similar it is the process it is much similar, but it is some difference, but it's not much. Timeline is different, but maybe 1 year or 2 years. So the measurement it is similar, but it is based on the regional culture and factor. So for my takeaway, the similar thing it is the people all discussion and try to get consensus. So for all the country, for all the stand bodies, yeah.
And so that you said that the timeline and the measurements, you know, thinking about, is there an example that you can think of for a project where the timeline went longer than was expected, or what the, you know, maybe it was much faster than expected? Is that something that you could help us just get an illustration of?
Okay. I give you an example on the whole boat. You are writing this whole boat less than 6 months based on our fantastic research on the battery safety, more than 100 years. But for Asia, for example, China, it is pretty quick because all of whole boat made by China. So they spend 1 year. So you know, some it is a lot of factors to affect the speed, the research, competence and how stakeholder we need get a consensus. If we have a lot of society, a lot of stakeholder, we need get much harder to get a consensus. So it is a very interesting topic. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Eric. Monju, would you like to speak to this question also, thinking about differences and similarities with different standards bodies?
Thank you, Kelly. And I think Eric already mentioned about what are the similarities. Definitely the similarity goes with the process. Process remains the same. However, as you rightly brought out, the developed countries, underdeveloped countries, and developing countries, all of them have different ways by which the standards are getting developed. What do I mean by ways is some of them have good understanding about the standard development process, but mostly when it comes to many of the underdeveloped countries, they really don't know how the standards are being developed. They really want to build that awareness and make sure that they understand what are the principles on which they have to develop the standards, what are the various stakeholders that have to be brought on, and a process to be developed, complete project management, the program, how do they identify the subject, etc. And in some countries, they are dependent on the global standards or some of the international standards and just try to see, okay, let's adopt it. But you remember what Colin said, not the international standards are not all relevant in all the regions. We cannot just go with the international standards. Again, they need understanding about how they can build their national differences, the cultural differences to be brought into their standard. But when you go to the developed country, definitely they have good understanding, they have good process in place, and some of them also have digitalization being involved and included in their standards development process. So overall, you can see all the different sets of people coming, working together, and it becomes a challenge for us to really see how we can modulate our services or our facilitation for developing the standards. So I think that answers the first part of the question. The second part of the question, let me give, I'll not mention the country, but in one of the country where I have been working very closely, a standard which had to be really taken into regulation. The standard was developed quite some years back and it went through revisions, but people were not really very focused on looking at what the standards address. When it went on to the regulation, when it became a technical requirement, there comes all the challenges, and the standard went through revision. It took almost 3 to 4 years for them to come back to a common understanding. So what I mean to say here is, while standards are being developed, implementation also becomes an important factor, and how the stakeholders use them and put them to use. And while they do it, it may take a longer time. However, the example what Eric spoke about on the hoverboards, I can give similar example with reference to the energy storage. The energy storage has become the important factor across the globe, and learning from the global standards that have been developed, when the national standardization bodies open up and say, yes, let's look at the global standards, let us develop the standard, let's harmonize or take that as the basis. The standard got developed just in the span of 9 months to 12 months. Look at the span of 3 to 4 years and look at the 9 to 12 months. So we have to deal with all of them. There is, as again, I'll go back to what Colin said, not one size fits to all. We need to really work with various stakeholders and the various requirements that come. Thank you.
Yes, that's so interesting. It's so much context needed for the work that you all do. And I'm wondering if anybody would like to speak to the process of taking something that exists at the international or a global standard. How does that get pulled down to a local level? There's the timeline and the history and the culture and all of these things to be sensitive to. What is there a process outline that you can help us understand what that looks like?
Hi, Kelly, maybe I can start. So I can actually at least give you two examples on that. So in common cases, when we talk about international standards development, so most of the time it starts with a country first, because when we have a new standard, it's usually for a new area where it has not been standardized before. So sometimes it's because of the new innovation, like for example the hoverboard. Yeah, that's one example. So different country will start because the industry and the business and consumers demand for a standard for safety, like what you covered in the opening. So new technology come with unknown risk. So that's why all different stakeholder group, they will actually ask for a standard. So most of the time we start from a national standard. Then, but we understand that different national standards body, they have different stakeholder group. That's why inevitably the national standards might have some differences as a result. So they will try to actually, after publication of the national standards, they'll try to reach consensus at the next level, could be a regional level, then after at the international level. So this is one process. And the other way is actually the other way around, which is sometimes the stakeholders, they were like, oh yeah, I just want to have international standards, because as we get more and more connected, especially globalization and digitalization, so sometimes one innovation affects everyone in the whole world, and then we're actually in the same boat, even with different countries. So that's why sometimes it makes sense to actually submit our standards to as international standards as a first place, and everyone participates. So I think we mentioned about there's no one size fit all solutions. This is true, but on the other hand, we also try our best to harmonize so that everyone can actually enjoy the best practices and the same products. Like let's say the laptop we're using for this webinar. So we don't want to, every time when we go to a different country, then the laptop has to be recertified. It's going to bring a lot of inconvenience. So that's why right now what we see is there's a trend that the manufacturers tend to start with international standards more and more. Then after different countries, they'll look at they'll actually look at the international standards and make the necessary modification to make sure that it meets the local need. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Colin. Thanks for that explanation. And so Lakshmi, you know, in the introduction, I spoke about you joining the standards team, the international standards team from the education team. And it seems, especially in our discussion this evening, that education is a really critical part of standards work. So why should an average person be aware of standards, and what benefits does that awareness offer? And if you have an example, that would be great.
Great question, Kelly. Thank you so much. I would say trace back your day from the moment you woke up, turned on the water heater, to your cooking of breakfast, to using your phone, to taking the transportation to wherever you are going. Imagine the number of products, that has had safety testings, and who's actually worked to make that safer for you around the world. It's always good to know that safety is not about following few tips or sticking to few rules. Standards actually form an important part of each one of us, what we can play. And the entire standards development process, it's all about consensus based. And that's what all of my colleagues just spoke. So just to take an example, I mean, all of them have spoken about hoverboards, but just from an average person's learning perspective. So when hoverboards were actually first sold in United States, they really became popular very quickly. And but these devices, these self-balancing scooters, had a dangerous secret which remained unknown to people, many until few homes and few families actually lost lives in their properties, and it was a bit late for them. And these hoverboards actually started catching fires, and it kind of led to explosions. By the end of 2015, it was very clear that these dangerous risks were kind of associated with the batteries that powered these devices. And it was these lithium batteries, lithium ion batteries, that was used, and it was rechargeable, which can store a lot of energy in a very small battery. They can actually even transfer the energies quickly. And the fact was that these are fragile, and damaging a lithium ion battery in certain way can even trigger a process called thermal runaway in the batteries. And thermal runaway is a rapid, uncontrolled increase of temperatures leading into fire and even explosions. So what happened is that, because the surge in demand of these hoverboards, these batteries were sometimes got overheated, that caused fire. Sometimes they were fully charged, that led to fire, overuse of it, and even sometimes really not being tested, and because of the sheer demand which was there. And in 2015, it was like, surging. This whole problem was increasing. And in December 2015, Jan 2016, the US Consumer Product Safety Commission warned the public that there were no standards for self-balancing scooters, which meant that there were no set guidelines, rules, or tests that the hoverboards were safe. And the safety problems actually persisted. In Feb 2016, CPSC declared that the hoverboards cannot be considered safe to use. And in July 2016, the CPSC recalled about 500,000 hoverboards, and which actually caused around 250 cases of fires and explosions, which led to even close to 4 million property damage. So in November 2015, UL was alerted, and the bright minds got together, to really research and understand more about the problem. And Eric has mentioned about the fastest standard which we developed at our end in March 2016. UL convened the first standard technical panel for hoverboard, and we had people from different backgrounds, different interests, who actually joined and shared their expertise here. And we came up in November 2016, we came up with our first standard for safety for electrical systems for personal e-mobility services. And that was UL 2272, which is approved by the standard technical panels and published. In 2017, again, China published a standard, where UL 2272 was the base. The whole test involves UL 2272 involves a lot of tests. Tests are part of this, which could be, which is all about blunted nail test and fire exposure and projectile test and all of that. You can, if somebody is interested, you can really go into our resources in UL Explore Lab, portable electrical power section, which actually talks about it in a language which everyone can understand. And that's what I think, Kelly, which is, and makes me feel that everyone has a voice, and it's important for even an average person to really know about standards and how it contributes to building a safer ecosystem around the world. Thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent, Lakshmi. Thank you. And I see Jess just dropped the link to that resource in the chat for our audience. So yeah, I think it's so interesting. We talk about how the world is engineered to keep us safe, and standards are, the guiding, I think, documents for how that engineering takes place. So the hoverboard is a really excellent example of that. And also a great example, Lakshmi, of why we should all be aware of standards in the standards process. Thank you. So this question is for, I'm going to start, Zahid, with you. How has the way that you have thought about or approached standards changed over the course of your career?
Yeah, so when I first started my career, like just after my graduation, it was in the fire protection domain, and from that point onwards, I was exposed to a lot of developed specifications which reference UL standards. So this instilled in me an interest to learn more about standards and understand more deeply how and where they come from. And over the course of time, I have taken the opportunity to dive more deeply into this domain and know more about standards until this interest grew to be a career path as I became part of the standards team.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you, Zahi. Yeah, the fire protection piece is a cornerstone of the standards work. That's excellent. Okay. How about Colin? Same question for you. How has your thought, how is the way that you've thought about or approached standards changed over time?
Yeah, I want to share a little bit. Thanks, Kelly. I want to share a little bit about how I stumbled into the standards world. So, I think most of us, or maybe none of us, actually just joined the standards community as a fresh graduate. Yeah, I think everyone should agree this. Yeah, so it's the same for me as well. So I started my career as a semiconductor engineer. So I work in the R&D area. So that's why I used to be a nerd, believe it or not. And then so back then I heard about standards because in our work when we use equipment, we have to make sure that all the equipment meets or comply with different standards. We actually are taught to read the labels to make sure that it really has passed certain standards. But to us, standards are just like something which has been developed by some noble persons. So these are the Bibles that we just have to follow and comply, and no question asked. Yeah. So over time, I mentioned just now. So and then we realized that I was wrong when it comes to standards. So I actually changed my career and then from engineer to actually join the government of Singapore. And then so every country there is a national standards body. So I joined the national standards body of Singapore, and then over time I started to learn more about standards and realize that what I thought in the past was wrong. So that's why I hope to share this message to everyone as well. Yeah. So what you learn about standards that is untouchable, is a Bible, and it might be wrong. So you might want to actually learn more about how to get yourself involved in the standards, and then and make your impact as well. I think, yeah, so this is actually how my approach about standards changed over time. Yeah, back to you, Kelly.
Great, thank you, Colin. And Lakshmi, do you want to add to that? How has your understanding and approach changed over time with standards?
Sure, Kelly. So when I started my career, I didn't know anything about standards. And it's UL who gave me the opportunity to learn about standards, the role it plays in building a safer ecosystem. There's so much we can do in this field. That's what my realization is. If we have a positive attitude, good communication skills, both written and verbal, because it's all about writing, and I mean, you really need to speak to also and engage with people, and willingness to engage with people. These are the three attributes one would really need. And I also personally feel that there's equal opportunity for people to explore this field from both STEM background and non-STEM. Thank you.
Great. Yes, definitely. You know, I think I can say that I also learned about standards when joining UL and the importance, and I learn from UL every day about the importance and why they matter so much, and now see them everywhere around me. And so that evolution, I think, is one that I can relate to, definitely. If we think about, you know, Colin, you said there probably isn't anybody here who started in standards. If we're speaking to college students now or students who are in their academic career, what is the right academic background to have when you're coming into the field of standards. And Zahid, I'll come back to you for this. What do you think is a good academic background here?
Kelly, that's a tough question.
Is it?
Because
Okay.
throughout my entire career, and then I've seen a lot of people who's involved in standards. And so commonly, most of the time we would think that it really depends on the subject matter. So if you're really, if we are involved in, let's say, electrical product standards, then all the people in the standards committee must be engineers, right? Yeah, but as what I mentioned earlier, so we have to make sure that all the products not just meets all the engineers' requirements or the nerdy engineers. I used to be from that side of the house, so I understand that. So they might not really understand what the consumers want. They might not really understand what the developing countries want. They might not really understand from the perspective of the policymakers how to implement a good policy and to regulate products. So that's why I would say that it's very important to have diverse academic background and also experience. So I can quote an example. So I used to work with a secretary of an ISO technical committee, which is a very important position. And then so this committee is about chemical testing standards for rubber products. So you might expect that she must be a top chemist in her community. But it turns out that she's not. She knows nothing about chemistry. She is actually a Japanese, and then she did English literature in her university. So that her value in the technical committee was not really to contribute to all this technical chemistry knowledge, but it's more about leading a discussion and driving consensus among the stakeholders, and then so that we can reach a consensus from different opinions and interests, and to make sure that standards can be used everywhere. So that's why I believe that the subject matter is important, but it's not the only thing that we should look out for in standards development. Thank you.
My greatest appreciation of standards work is the word consensus and the ability that you all have to work around a consensus-driven process. So I love that example, Colin. Thank you. Zahid, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, so while I personally come from an engineering background, I agree with Colin that engineers would be more involved with the technical aspects of standards. But the thing that makes the standards team special is the diversity it presents, right? So members of the team come from different educational backgrounds and consequently bring in different viewpoints, thoughts, and perspectives, and thus strengthening the team's performance and the viewpoints. So again, just to emphasize that it's not only the engineering background, it could be any background that could contribute to the overall viewpoints. Thank you.
Awesome. So all of those of you in our audience who are not engineering majors, there's still a place in standards for you. Lakshmi, did you want to add anything to that?
Nothing much, Kelly. It's just resonating whatever my colleagues have just spoken. Ultimately, it's all about the ability to listen, the ability to facilitate, and the ability and the openness to take perspectives from different people and work together. You don't really need to be a subject matter expert, but it's all about your communication skills. It's all about your positive attitude, and it's all about working with people.
Thank you. And I'm reminded of where we started our conversation with what you all have learned and how you apply it in your work with the challenge and the patience and persistence and this embrace of failure. So I think that those are skills that supersede different content areas or majors that we hope all young people are getting an education in right now. Okay, so I have another question for the panelists, and I'm going to ask everybody to answer this one, and then I'll go to the questions from the audience. So the last question that I have for you is, what is one thing that you wish more people understood about standards? And Eric, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. So I just want to add it, the standard is everywhere. It is important. The house you live and the public transportation you take, the water you drink, that is house standard. You didn't notice it, but it is everywhere. So take your curiosity to look at your computer. You may find a URL, or that is the reusing standard for testing. So it is amazing. You will find another word. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's been my biggest learning, is that I cannot look at anything anymore and not think about the standard that went into that. That's great. Thanks, Eric. Okay, Monju, why don't we go to you next?
Yeah, I think in my view, standards fuel innovation, because as you meet certain basic requirement, what you really would be looking at, how do I really enhance my product, how enhance the efficiencies, the performance, the safety of the product or the process that we're working on. So it fuels the innovation, fuels the trade, enhances the trade, and definitely for economy of the country or the region as a whole. So this is what I look at from the standards perspective. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Manju. And I love that, there's the importance of standards, and the layer of that is the importance of international standards work. I think that comes through, and is what I'm thinking about when I listen to your response to that. And that innovation piece is so critical. Thank you. Zahid.
Yeah, so again, I reiterate that standards is very important, and I would really encourage and recommend everyone to understand the importance of standards. To be honest, I wish people would not look at standards as obstacles in their way, nor as mere additional steps in a process. In fact, it actually takes a lot of time and effort for professionals to develop standards which act as a guideline to facilitate life as well as ensure safety of humans and the environment. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Zahid. I agree. Especially, it comes back to that word consensus and how long that takes and how much effort that takes to reach in the development of those standards. An underappreciated thing, I think. Lakshmi.
I would wish more people to understand actually the power of standards. I mean, what all of you have spoken, the power of standards and the larger role it plays in increasing economies, be it with innovation or with risk mitigation, thereby leading to building a safer community, and above all, how important standards are in saving lives. So that's what I would say. I wish more people really understood.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that life-saving piece. I mean, it's the core to our mission, right? It's building a safer world, and standards sitting at the crux of that. That's great. Thank you, Lakshmi. And Colin, how about for you?
Thanks, Kelly. So I just want to, I actually agree with all my fellow panelists. So I just want to actually reinforce what, especially what Manju and Zahid mentioned about standards are supposed to support innovation. They're not supposed to obstruct anything. So what I hope everyone will understand is, based on my past experience, I have been in a lot of debates that standards obstruct innovation. So the innovators, they have new ideas to make things better, but when they come to commercialization, they realize that standards are there to block them because the new innovation is not reflected in standards. That's why they are not able to gain market access because of that, or they cannot even get regulators' approval. So, but on the other hand, if we think from the other way, so standards is actually like fire. So there is potential to improve our life, but there's also potential to cause disaster. So the only difference is, do you know how to use it? Do you understand that? So standards is supposed to be a platform where everyone can participate, especially in UL, we are very open. So anyone can just get involved in the standards development to understand what are the requirements and educate yourself, and then use standards to your advantage. And then even propose a proposal to revise those standards to make sure that the standards meets your the innovation direction. Yeah, so there's something that I hope people can understand more and use it as a strategic tool to support your innovation. Thank you.
Yeah, so as a stepping, and it goes back, Zahi, to what you said about not being an obstacle, that it's actually a supportive mechanism for reaching these safer and more innovative pieces. We've been talking a lot about emerging technologies and the need of standards to have to keep up pace with emerging technologies, and in some ways there may be a balance that standards provides for the pace by putting some supports and some standards in place. Thank you, Colin. So we do have a couple of questions from the audience. One is, and this for whomever feels ready to jump in and answer this, how can standards be used to improve safety in unregulated environments? And we should say that our standards are not regulation, they're voluntary standards. And so I just want to say that now. I know my colleagues will say it as well, but the question is really about how we can improve safety in unregulated environments using standards. I'd like to jump in there. It's probably not the easiest answer or question.
What I feel, let me give my view, and maybe Colin, Zahi, any of you can jump in. What I really feel, it is commitment of the producer who manufactures the product or who is designing the product to make sure that it is safer. So when he or she has to develop the standard, the product, they have to make sure that the product is safer. Like the example that we spoke about is the hoverboard, which was a great innovation, but had to really go back to the drawing board again because it did not conform to any of the standard. So while the regulation is one of the things pushing the things under your throat, but be self-aware and see to it that your ultimate goal is to make the world safer place, give safer products, sustainable products to the world. So that's what I think is going to standards are going to help in making the products safer. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Monju. Does anybody else want to provide a response to that one? It's a great answer.
Yeah, thank you, Manju. So I'd just like to add or to clarify one more thing. That it's very important to think of it as a completed chain of stakeholders. So it's the responsibility does not fall under one stakeholder. Rather, it's the completed chain, starting from the producers to the consumers, going through AHJs, insurers, and others. So just wanted to highlight that every single stakeholder plays a vital role in this process. Thank you.
Great. Yes. Thank you, Zahi. Important point. Okay. Okay. Well, to wrap up, I can't believe it's already been an hour. This is always so informative. I really love connecting with this group of people. So we are on to our last question. I'm wondering if you could all say what, if you have a favorite standard and why. And so in our organization, we speak in letters and numbers and an alphanumeric code, like UL 4600 is a standard. So if you could tell us the number and then also tell us what it is, that would be great. And I'll go back around on my screen this time. Colin, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Yeah. So I don't have one favorite because there's so many nice standards that we have developed. And then I can only tell you that my recent favorite standard is actually the UL 923. So that's actually the standards for microwave ovens. So everyone have, most of us have microwave oven at home, so we use that, but we don't know that someone has been developing standards to make sure it's safe, so it does not harm us. And that's why I've been wondering when I open a microwave oven, putting in the food, and then when I closed it, is there any radiation coming to me, penetrating my body and kill me? So rest assured, it's not going to happen. So recently we just updated the standard, to revise the standards, because right now there are some cases of children injury because the microwave oven, when it's under operation, and then the door can be opened easily. So a lot of kids, they're not aware. They just want to see, they see the food, they smell it, and then they love it. They just open the door and take out the food and got injured. So to address this injury accidents, so we just revise the standards to make sure that when it's in operation, there should be a two-way approach to unlock and open the door to make sure that we can prevent child injury. So that's why it really become my favorite standards, because it protect the vulnerable people. Yeah, so there's something that I wish encourage everyone to Google UL 923 and take a look. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Colin. Yes, I watch a lot of home renovation TV shows, and I noticed that microwaves are getting put lower and lower toward the ground, not up high anymore. So what an important standard for protecting children. Okay, Lakshmi.
I would say UL 2272, the standard for hoverboards, which was developed in a record span of time. We've spoken a lot about it. And I was personally involved in this piece when we were developing the case study and part of the Explore Lab teamwork. So, I mean, that gave me an opportunity to delve deeper into the world of standards and how it's done and what kind of research goes behind it. So I would say that's, but there are many more standards which are going to be written, and looking forward to all of those things which will ultimately save lives and make the world a better place to live.
That's great. Thank you, Lakshmi. Yes, that one. It's nice because I think, Eric, you said standards are everywhere, and they're almost everywhere to the point that we don't know that they're there. And with the hoverboard, we can point at that and know that there's a standard in that safety process, and we can recognize it really readily. That's great. Thank you. Zahid.
Yeah, so to me, as Colin started, so I like many standards, but the one that I love the most is UL10C, which is a fire safety standard for swinging doors. And the main reason behind my love to this standard is the great impact of fire-rated doors, where we have seen a lot of incidents where just a fire-rated door have saved a lot of lives and the property. So I assume, so I believe this is very important, the standard, and I highly recommend that everyone would go and Google and watch Close Before You Doze, and I think this is a very nice video to watch and to learn from. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Zahid. Yes, and hopefully from the entire discussion, you'll see that different parts of our organization work really closely together, and the Close Before You Doze is an educational campaign around closing your door at night. And so thanks for pointing to that too, Zahid. That's great. Okay, Monju, what's your favorite standard?
Thank you, Kelly. I think as Colin said, yes, it's very difficult to say the one standard which is favorite because the thing keeps changing. And as of now, I have fallen in love with UL 3600, which is while it's still under the development and due for publishing. It's a circular economy standard. Being an environmental enthusiast and really saying what I believe is, it is not that we have inherited this earth from our foreparents. It is actually where we have brought it from, or we have bought it from our future generation. So how do we hand over this earth in the same or a better form is what really we have to look at. So circular economy is one which really addresses about reuse, recycle, repurpose, all of that to make sure that this world is a safer, secure, and sustainable place. So yeah, as of now, I am in love with UL 3600. We'll see as we evolve further. Thank you.
I realize this question is like asking a parent who their favorite child is. So I know this is a very difficult question. But yes, the circular economy standard, I think, is very exciting. And we also talk about, we're making the world a safer, more sustainable place. And that standard is a big part of that sustainability piece. Excellent. Eric, would you like to tell us your favorite standard?
Okay, I think our guys have the same choice with me, but I I have a lot. I will choose the whole boat because when I was working at UL, the standard is birth, and I can know from the beginning, from the birth to development standard for the states and China. So it is for this standard, it is a new emergency technology, new product. How you are as a standard nation development organization put effort research to helping our public society be safe. That is the most relevant to our mission, working for a safe world. So I will choose this one. Yeah.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Eric. I know these are really hard. That may be the hardest question that you had all night. Great. Well, that is the time that we have for this evening, but I just want to pull together some of the thinking very quickly, and that's thinking about this larger impact of standards on society. So without standards, there would be chaos. Manufacturers would not know what's important in developing new products. Consumers would not have confidence in the products that they are buying. Products and components would not operate together, and trade among countries would be affected, as a country would not have the confidence in allowing products to enter their borders. Standards minimize that chaos. Standards help establish a baseline of requirements. They address interoperability. They help new products come to market, and they facilitate trade among countries. I think we've heard today how very important standards are to addressing safety, security, and sustainability issues for people all over the world. And you've seen the passion from the people that are working in that space around the world. So I want to mention that the UL Standards development process is open to participants globally, and we want to encourage you to come and check out that process if you're interested. So thank you to our panelists this evening. Coming up on April 5th, David Roth, another of our standards professionals, will be presenting Data Science for a Safer World. So this is from the perspective of a data scientist, you know, from his perspective, seeing that the world can be processed as a set of infinite data points. So how do we sort these points into a coherent scientific narrative, one that other people can understand and one that can be used to improve safety, security, and sustainability also around the world, also huge global, international, and regional implications from that one. As usual, you can register for that upcoming webinar at the link in the chat that just dropped in there. And as usual, we'll be sending you all a survey asking you for your thoughts about tonight's webinar. And so we can continue to align the series with what it is that you are looking for. So again, Colin, Lakshmi, Zahid, Monju, and Eric, thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for your time this morning, afternoon, and evening, and we hope to see you all soon. Take good care, everyone. Stay safe.